You're watching a production of South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
Production funding for The Badlands, Nature's Time Capsule, has been provided by Golden West Telecommunications and by the Friends of South Dakota Public Broadcasting Endowment Fund.
Badlands. The term comes from the Lakota, who called the area Mako-Sicha. Mako meaning bad, Sicha meaning land. A rare geologic wonder, the Badlands of South Dakota are plains carved deeply by racing water and relentless wind. The creatures who have called this area home are as extreme as the seasons that blast the landscape. It's a region that has fascinated humans for centuries, both for its beauty and its mysteries. These lands are revered for many reasons. Its unique geology and hidden treasures. It's also a place some have called home for generations. For some, it's a place of sacred importance. These are the Badlands, nature's time capsule. In the year 1939, President Franklin Roosevelt declared a northern region of the White River Badlands a national monument. Meanwhile, lands to the south were relegated as nothing more than a World War II bombing range. Those lands were saved in 1978 when the Badlands National Monument and the Oglala Lakota Nation agreed to co-manage and protect 122,000 additional acres. Today, the park spans over 240,000 acres of grasslands and eroding buttes.
There's two main reasons why the park was established, and one of them happens to do with the scenery, the geology, what people see as they drive through the park, and the other was the fossils.
It's a 70-million-year-old tale, a tale told by the layers of sediment that color the buttes and pinnacles of the park.
The geologic history of the area basically shows that this area was once an ocean, a marine environment essentially. This ocean is referred to by geologists as the Western Interior Seaway, and it stretched from what we know today as the Gulf of Mexico all the way up into Canada.
That interior seaway formed the very bottom layer of the Badlands, called the Pierce Shale Formation. These grayish-black layers were deposited between 69 and 75 million years ago. The black mud sea bottom has since hardened into shale. How do we know this area was an inland sea? Fossils, giant sea creatures like the mosasaur. The sea eventually receded when the Rocky Mountains and the Black Hills arose. After the sea drained away, the exposed top layers formed a fossilized yellow soil. Today, we see that soil in the Badlands formations called the Yellow Mounds. The real paleontological treasures of the Badlands are hidden in the layers that lie above the Yellow Mounds. These layers date back about 36 million years and encase a collection of ancient mammals unlike any other location in the world. Paleontologist Dr. James Martin has spent the last 40 years working in the Badlands.
And they were formed principally by sediments, muds, ashes coming from the west. As the Rocky Mountains raised to the west, much of that sediment was shed off and actually covered even the Black Hills. So we have river sediments, floodplain sediments, and volcanic ash being shed out into this basin that lay to the east of the Black Hills.
For 500,000 years, this once flat floodplain was carved out by wind and water, creating the spires and buttes we see today. We can learn volumes about the ancient history when we dig down into these exposed layers.
Well, the Badlands are classical. If you talk to anyone in the world and you say the word Oligocene, which is essentially the middle part of the age of mammals, every scientist thinks White River Badlands of South Dakota. It is the classical area and the place where our understanding of what life was like during that interval really is based, both historically and currently.
The Museum of Geology, located on the campus of the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, is the repository for the fossils found in the Badlands. There are also displays showcasing the early age of mammals the Badlands are famous for.
So this exhibit represents the earliest part of the Badlands. The Badlands really has three separate ages, and this is the lowest, or the earliest part of the Badlands, known as the Chadronian. Now this was a time when the largest animals that existed in the Badlands occurred. And those animals are called brontotheres. And this is a very beautiful specimen of a brontothere, one of the few complete skeletons to ever come out of the Badlands. These animals were very much like rhinoceros in their appearance and also probably in their habitat.
36 million years ago, the climate of South Dakota was extremely different, accommodating creatures we don't associate with the Great Plains today.
Now we think that there was swampy areas at this time, the earliest part, because right here there's an alligator, and this is the last stand of alligators in South Dakota. After the early part of the White River Badlands, or the Chadronian time, alligators become extinct. Now throughout time in the Badlands, there is a drying succession or drying events. This middle diorama here in the Museum of Geology represents the middle part of the White River Badlands. The middle part is known as the Arellan Age, but essentially for our purposes, it's the middle part of the Badlands. And this is a time when the drying has started. We went from a very moist area in our last diorama to a much drier time here in this middle diorama. The animals in this diorama are amazing in the fact that they give us a glimpse into the early life of many of the animals that we're quite familiar with. And along with those come some very different animals that we have really very few relatives today. Now one of the cutest of the animals in the Badlands, as far as I'm concerned, is this little deer-like creature called Leptomyrex. It's a little chevrotin-type deer, and these animals actually do live still in Southeast Asia. Now, if you've got an abundance of little deer-like critters, you've got somebody that's going to eat them, and that somebody is probably these two cats in the back here, along with other carnivores. But these two are saber-toothed cats, known as Hoplophonius, and they were probably the dominant cat in the Badlands. First of all, I said that this area was getting drier through time. Well, that's evidenced by these tortoises. There are two tortoise shells here in front of us. One of them even has the skeleton. You can see the skull peeking out of the shell there. These high dome shells are suggestive of tortoises and also suggest that these were not pond turtles, but were actually tortoises living out on the land themselves.
It's during this middle age of the Badlands that one of its most famous residents lived. Its nickname is the Big Pig because it could grow to 6 feet in height. Its discovery by some hikers in 1993 led to a paleontological gold mine.
In turn, the park sent out some paleontologists to investigate. They had a 3-day permit to dig, and they dug for 3 days, and they just kept finding more and more and more stuff. So they went back and said, look, there's no way we're going to get this stuff out in 3 days. And 14 years later, we're still digging in the same place.
The discovery of the Big Pig, or Archaeotherium, led scientists to an ancient watering hole known as the Big Pig Dig.
The Badlands used to be very much like an African savanna. And animals would come here to get a drink of water, and the mud here was very sticky, so sometimes they would get stuck, and as they struggled and as they cried out, that would attract predators. The predators would come and attack these animals, and since it was a scavenge site, they would tear these animals apart. We've never found a fully articulated specimen here, meaning we've never found a full skeleton of one animal. So this definitely lends credence to the waterhole theory. This is such a unique site. The amazing statistic about fossilization is that less than 1% of everything that's ever lived on this planet has been fossilized. So to find something like the Pig Dig, where you've got such a small area and have taken out over 10,000 bones in such a tiny place, is miraculous. It's just 1,000,000 to 1. It's You can't even describe how lucky we were to find this.
Soon paleontologists will cover the pig dig for good and turn their attention elsewhere in the park. The fossils they have extricated from the pig dig are sent to the Museum of Geology, where they are preserved and cataloged. It's these fossils that help tell the story of the Badlands, including the third chapter in the 3 ages of the Badlands.
And then as we go to the very top, we get into an area known as the Whitneyan, or the late part of the White River Badlands. And this is a continuation of the drying trend we saw from the Chadronian through Arellan, all the way now into the last part of the White River Badlands as typically known. We're seeing big channels coming out of the Black Hills carrying feldspars and micas. And you can see these channels making these beautiful toadstools. And here's a big block of the channel here. There were animals traversing within these channels. You can see footprints on this block of a camel. There's actually cat tracks that appear to kind of be following it. The large specimen standing on the rock there is called Protocerus. It's a herbivore, and it's much like our deer. The males have all these cranial ornamentation, probably for display and for sexual attraction to the females, whereas the females have a pretty normal skull without that kind of ornamentation. This is a strange creature. If you look at its feet, it has 4 toes in front and 2 toes in back. That's kind of an unusual situation, and probably certainly an adaptation, somewhat for speed, but also for living in this pretty wet stream border environment.
Why do the Badlands contain so many creatures in such pristine condition? The answer is blowing in the wind.
Is with these beautiful river deposits and all the volcanic ash, there was free silica available. And silica is the same thing as your window glass. And it is the perfect thing for fossilization. So with all this ash essentially decomposing and freeing up free silica, the fossilization is pristine. The silica is what makes the best fossils. And the Badlands is perfect environment for fossilization. As a result, we have beautiful, beautiful preservation. That coupled with the fact that life is abundant. We're looking at a situation here in North America much like the Serengeti today, on a much different time interval, of course, but a great abundance of mammals especially.
Today, the climate of the Badlands has 4 very distinct seasons, ranging from warm, dry summers to harsh, cold winters.
When we study the Badlands, we're actually studying the history of life on this planet. The past can tell us a lot about the future. By looking at the White River Badlands, we can see many situations that occur now and also can give us a clue about what the future is like. For instance, why did all of these fantastic animals become extinct? What causes their extinction? Is there something we can learn there that can tell us about man's extinction? What can we see about environmental change?
By the time humans made their way into the Badlands, the landscape looked very much as it does today. The earliest humans to come to the region were Paleo-Indians, who had roamed the area hunting for bison and deer 13,000 years ago. In more recent history, the nomadic Oglala Lakota had come to the region. The Lakota followed the great bison herds that numbered in the millions. Bison were a major source of food and resources for the Lakota people. Throughout the 1800s, the tribes made treaties with the U.S. government regarding their land rights, but the discovery of gold in the Black Hills prompted an influx of prospectors. Homesteaders were settling ever closer for the rich grassland soil. Soon the U.S. government broke the treaties it had made with the Lakota people. Indians were being forced onto reservations. Those who resisted were persecuted. Tragedy occurred on December 29, 1890, when the 7th Cavalry was ordered by the U.S. government to escort an encampment of Minichanku and Hunkpahasu to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. When the 7th Cavalry troops thought they were being met with resistance, they opened fire on the encampment. By the end of the Wounded Knee Massacre, up to 300 Lakota men, women, and children were killed. 25 U.S. soldiers were also killed. Some troops were killed by their own weapons when 4 Hotchkiss guns fired into the surrounded encampment. That was the last armed conflict between U.S. cavalry forces and the Oglala Lakota. But these were not the last sounds of gunfire to be heard in this arid land. During World War II, the government turned the Badlands into a bombing range, displacing many Lakota families once again. Still today, there are numerous unexploded ordnance littering the practice grounds, so hikers need to be cautious. In 1976, the Oglala Lakota Nation entered into an agreement with Badlands National Park to co-manage over 130,000 acres of their land. The South Unit offers some of the most remote and breathtaking scenery at Badlands Park.
There's a lot of cultural significance with the Badlands and the South Unit. And South Unit of the National Park is mostly on reservation land. And a lot of the reservation, back in 1890 with the ghost dance, that we have the stronghold there. We have old chiefs that were buried in the Badlands. So it's kind of more like a cultural area for our Lakota people.
One of the most notable Oglala leaders to be buried in the Badlands is the hero Tashanka Wiko, Crazy Horse, renowned for his bravery in battle and loyalty to his people. A white man once posed a question to Crazy Horse. He asked, "Where are your lands now?" Crazy Horse's response was, "My lands are where my people are buried." Crazy Horse Memorial depicts the Oglala chief pointing eastward toward the Badlands. The White River Visitor Center is staffed by members of the Oglala Sioux tribe who offer interpretation for visitors.
First of all, we have the Waneatu Ooapi, which of course Waneatu meaning the winter count. The events described in the days of the daily activity of our people. And then we have 2 individuals here, and it goes on telling the story of a time frame, actually, of what was taking place during that duration of that time.
It kind of brings a good morale to the Lakota people of the visitor center. And a lot of people get a different perspective whenever they come here. They ask, where's all the teepees? Where's all the Indians at, they'd say. So we just kind of interpret the change of culture. Culture changed. So they asked if we still live in teepees, and we say no, we live in houses. So common life like everybody else. So they want to know more of where are the buffalo. They say we were a tribe, so depending on buffalo, where are the buffalo? The main question they really ask about is massacre at Wounded Knee, and they ask, and a lot of them apologize for if they had someone in the cavalry back then, in the service back then, they apologize and what happened back then. So it's kind of more or less, it's kind of out of curiosity, a lot of the questions come out.
White River Visitor Center offers guests a chance to view the past from the perspective of the Lakota people, as well as see the present for what it is.
Us as the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, as Oglala Lakota people, that we're still here, that regardless of what happened in the past, that we're here. We're trying to teach our younger generations. We're trying to teach them to live their life. So it's just kind of to the visitors that you're welcome to come to our reservation. We're not hostile. We're not trying to be the old days, I guess. So you're always welcome to come, and we're here at White River Visitor Center.
The first whites to utilize the Badlands were French fur trappers. In 1862, Congress passed the Homestead Act, which provided settlers with 160 acres of land if they could sustain a claim for 5 years. Homesteaders made their way out to the Badlands in the late 1800s to early 1900s. Tony Kierdena's family immigrated from Europe in 1903. His family now has homesteaded on the same piece of property for nearly 100 years.
The family come out in June 1910, I think about the 20th. And mother took coming up. Of course, I guess the train come into Emily about 4 o'clock in the morning, and the moon was shining, seen them Badlands, and she told Dad, I don't think I'll want to stay. Well, he says, what the hell are you going to do? We're out of money.
Tony Kuderna was born in the sod home on the property that still stands today.
It's actually kind of just dug in the bank there. See, there's a cellar on the north end, see? And of course, it was kind of a, well, it was a frame building, but they lined it with sod then, see, for warmth in the wintertime, see? But there was quite a few card parties played in there in them years back.
The Dirty 30s had a hand in wiping out some of the homesteads that used to surround the Kudernas.
And out there used to get some terrible windstorms in them. But there was quite a few homesteaders filed on homestead in this basin. About 7 or 8 of them, I think, see? And then, of course, the drought hit, and of course, then they all left.
Today, Tony's nephew Don and his wife Shirley run the operation. They face modern-day challenges that their forefathers did not. Neighboring a national park with a species reintroduction program is a complication for today's ranchers, namely prairie dogs. The primary food source for the highly endangered black-footed ferret has spread from the parks to the ranch.
Well, I'm a 3rd generation on this land, and I was born in that house over there. Well, I hope we can still stay on the land, but we're thinking about selling because of the prairie dogs. They're putting us out of business. We have 480 acres 11 miles east of here, and we haven't had a cow on there for 10 years.
The recent drought has added to the spread of prairie dogs onto private land.
When there's less water, the grass doesn't grow as high, there's not enough food there for the prairie dogs. And in the grassland, when there's cattle grazing, there's competition between prairie dogs and cattle for the grass that's available. So with the drought, the prairie dog towns have expanded greatly. The population hasn't expanded so much as the area of the population expanded as they're searching for more food. So it has increased conflicts and controversy quite a bit with the local ranchers, neighboring landowners.
Many landowners feel that not enough is being done to keep up with the encroaching prairie dogs. Farmer and rancher Charlie Cruz is also a 3rd-generation landowner. He has personally financed prairie dog control on his property in the past.
You know, my grandparents homesteaded here, and my parents have lived here all their life. I love this area. I'm happy here. Besides being run over with prairie dogs, you know, this is the greatest place on earth as far as I'm concerned. and it's a great place to raise a family. And I don't want to move. I don't want to have to move. And why should the federal government come in and run me over with prairie dogs and say, oh, well, your best option is to sell your place and leave? You know, that's unfair.
Well, I'll tell you, with that prairie dog situation, I'm afraid we're going to be forced to probably sell out too. I don't know, just in the next year or so, or a couple of years or so, but the ranching, well, this used to be a good ranching country until the prairie dogs start coming in, see? And I don't see what the purpose of these prairie dogs are, see? They're not any use to the public, except for sightseeing, you know, see?
We have to be cognizant of the concerns raised about prairie dogs. Absolutely have to be, because we're not about eliminating people's jobs or livelihood. At the same time, it's critical that we maintain the integrity of the place for the wildlife into the future. And there is no easy answer.
We consider in Badlands National Park that prairie dogs are an integral part of the ecosystem, the natural ecosystem, the native ecosystem that was here long before Europeans settled the area. That there's a natural system that evolved with bison, prairie dogs, all the other wildlife of the prairie. That system seemed to work, and in the park we try to recreate that as best we can.
Since the recent drought was not initially factored into the ferret reintroduction plan, both ranchers and park officials have had to try to come together on a management plan.
Now, of course, we have park boundaries and landowners that are neighboring us on the boundaries, and so we have a responsibility to try to reduce their losses from prairie dogs that may encroach onto private land from the park. And so last year we developed a prairie dog management plan in response to the growing population in the area. So Badlands National Park does prairie dog control within a quarter mile of the park boundary where we border private land, and then there's state programs that will come in on the private land side for the landowners and control prairie dogs on their side. So they are getting assistance. Now our plan took, I believe, 2 years to develop, and we finally got it done last winter, and it's implemented, and we did start doing some control. So we are beginning to take action on that in response to the landowners' complaints.
Well, then they just kept wanting more and more.
Because nobody's completely happy with it, either on the environmental side, who thinks that prairie dogs, they believe in prairie dogs as a component of the ecosystem, or the ranchers who obviously see them competing with their cattle for the grass. So it's a tough situation where we can't please everybody.
Oblivious to the controversy are the black-footed ferrets themselves. The ferret is slowly coming back after near total eradication. In the early 1900s, the government encouraged massive prairie dog extermination. In the process, the ferret lost its prime food source and much of its habitat. Thanks to captive breeding efforts, reintroduction programs, and the reestablishment of prairie dog towns, the ferret is making a comeback.
The success of the reintroduction program was determined by the fact that the ferrets are a self-sustaining wild population now. There's no more reintroductions to boost the numbers. They're reproducing enough to keep the population growing in the national park and the Buffalo Gap National Grasslands, which make up the Kanawha Basin Badlands recovery area. There's probably around 200 to 250 ferrets. It's a little difficult to have a straight number because there's reproduction every year.
In the last year, the ferrets have faced yet another challenge. Sylvatic plague has made its way to the prairie dog towns that support the ferret. The plague is carried by fleas that infest the prairie dog towns, so workers have been dusting the holes with flea powder.
We also, besides dusting the prairie dog towns, started a vaccination for ferrets, and they were capturing ferrets and vaccinating them to try and ensure their safety. And the plan was that if we dusted 11,000 acres, we would probably protect 2/3 of the ferret population. And we did get it this year and pretty much stop the plague for the time being. But it's going to be a continuing effort.
Much like the black-footed ferret, the elusive swift fox was recently reintroduced to the park.
Basically, when this area was settled by the Europeans, you know, they did a fair amount of conversion of the prairie. Plus, there are also programs out there to remove the large carnivores and stuff. And they baited carcasses of strychnine and things like that. And these fox are carrion eaters too, so swift fox were like secondary targets on there, you know. Not intended to be removed primarily, but they were too.
Wildlife biologist Greg Schroeder and graduate student Todd Russell collect data on the fox population to monitor their success. This includes baiting and trapping the somewhat unwilling participants.
We ready? Let's work this one.
Let's do it.
This fox, we'll put it into a bag here, like a laundry bag type deal. And then we'll get a weight on it. And then from then we'll take it out and handle it.
They won't go in.
Get a quick weight on this one. 2 kilograms or 4.5 pounds. Now he's holding the muzzle basically with one hand, his gloved hand, reaching his free hand in there and scruffing right behind the neck. Then he'll just pull it out and hold it up, and we end up setting it in his lap. First thing we do is like to look at their teeth, see if they have any injuries to their teeth, but it also helps us age them.
For good measure, the fox is given a flea powder bath, and then the blood work begins.
We'll start out by drawing a little blood on her here. Take that for later genetic analysis. Still, it's like hitting a spaghetti noodle.
Biologists also equip the little fox with a transponder chip.
Comes with you get a reader, you run that over there and you come up with a 9-digit code, or 9-digit number basically, and that tells us from now on who she is, you know, if she was to lose her radio call or whatever.
The fox also receives some vaccination shots, a quick spray, and then is let loose. Many park visitors never get a chance to see the fleet-footed fox. But a more visible Badlands resident makes regular appearances. Teresa Zimmerman has come to Badlands Park to monitor the bighorns after new stock was brought in from New Mexico. The park had to bring sheep in from other states to introduce a population back into the Badlands.
The last bighorn sheep was harvested in 1925. In 1894, as this area was being settled, domestic sheep were brought into the Badlands National Park area. And bighorn sheep and domestic sheep are not very tolerant of one another. Domestic sheep carry bacteria that are lethal to bighorn sheep. So the introduction of domestic sheep in this area, coupled with unrestricted harvesting for food for miners and loggers out in the Black Hills, is primarily what caused the decimation of the species.
In 1964, South Dakota Game Fish and Parks and the National Park Service first reintroduced the bighorn sheep by bringing in some animals from Colorado. In 2004, new animals were brought up from New Mexico to help broaden the sheep's gene pool. Today, the park's population has grown to over 80 animals.
Bighorn sheep are able to access areas that other species are not able to access. Bighorn sheep are tied to very, very rugged terrain. They generally select slopes between 27 and 85 degrees, so very, very steep slopes. Their hooves move independently of one another. So as they're climbing up these really steep terrains, one hoof will be a little bit higher, and also the back portion of their hoof is semi-sticky, which allows them to grip. So they're able to access areas where sod tables or patches of vegetation that are on very, very steep slopes or very, very high up. And so they offer grazing opportunities in areas that are, these plant systems definitely need and thrive on. So they offer just a bit of diversity and occupy a very unique niche here, which no other species is capable of doing.
The sheep are a park favorite among visitors, performing high-altitude acrobatics that are rarely seen elsewhere.
The visitors are very excited. Bighorn sheep occupy such steep and rugged terrain that oftentimes it's very hard to see the species in a natural setting. They are very, very charismatic species. They're very playful. And there's really not a whole lot that's known about the species, primarily in systems like this.
Zimmerman utilizes transmitter collars to help track down the sheep. Monitoring the bighorns is key to gaining valuable observations.
So this is what we call a VHF radio collar, very high frequency. It emits a frequency much like your radio stations do. And so this collar has a specific channel on it, so you can think of it like a channel on your television. So what we do then is we put this collar around the neck of the animal so it fits much like a belt. We want to make sure that the collar is on tight enough so that an animal won't lose the collar, won't get a foot caught up in the collar, but also loose enough so that the animal is still able to eat and things like that normally. And then I make observations about behavior, what sort of habitat we find them in, the composition of the herd, so how many males are in there, how many females, the age of the males if they're there, the number of lambs, activities like that. I think having these restoration programs, especially in areas like Badlands, offers a really unique experience obviously for visitors, and also unique experiences for scientists and naturalists to be able to observe this species in a very unique ecosystem.
The information gained from the successful Badlands sheep restoration has value beyond park borders as well.
What I'd really like to see in the future is to be able to use the models that we've created based on the research that's been done, to be able to use these areas that we've identified outside of Badlands National Park that are suitable bighorn sheep habitat.
Since Badlands National Park had taken on the task of reintroducing native species, their mission would not be complete without the return of the Goliath of the prairie, the bison.
Badlands National Park chose to bring buffalo in. The National Park Service is all about natural ecosystems and native species. That's what we're established to have, and it's our legal mandate, which by law that's what we're supposed to be doing. All native species that we can possibly bring in that would be viable in today's world, and that we have enough land to support. And so buffalo were brought back to put a native species back on the native prairie that we have. Bison are integral to the prairie health. They eat the plants, they keep them growing right. They evolved together over thousands and thousands of years. The bison's a dominant herbivore of the prairie, and they're just a natural part of what the native prairie is. And so it was very important for us to get that back into the Badlands Park.
Bison used to roam the Badlands area in herds of thousands, but were killed off by settlers for a number of reasons. Bison competed with cattle for grazing lands. Railroad companies also were a factor. It's rumored that William Frederick Buffalo Bill Cody got his nickname by killing over 4,000 bison while working for Kansas Pacific Railroad Company. There were also ranchers who tried to crossbreed the bison with cattle, depleting the purity of bison genetics by creating animals called Cataloos and Herfaloaf.
You know, over the years, they tried several times, some of these ranchers. One in particular was a guy named Buffalo Jones who was in Kansas, had a ranch in Kansas and saved some of the remaining bison. And he wanted to develop bison cattle hybrid to be more hardy on the plains, provide more meat, but be more manageable. And so he bred quite a few with cattle. And there's pictures of some of those that, you know, they're basically really odd-looking animals that you can tell they're not bison. They've got cattle in them.
The once great herds were pushed nearly to the point of extinction. If not for the foresight of a few, we may not have the bison that remain today.
When the bison were almost extinct, there's really about 5 founders herds around the country that were basically saved by ranchers who, you know, there's a few small bands left in the country, and there's 5 people who are given credit for saving the bison. 2 of those were Dupree, I think it's Frederick Dupree, that I believe South Dakota's town of Dupree is named for, and then Scotty Phillip, where I live in Phillip, South Dakota. And they saved some of the animals that were left on the prairie, kept them from getting shot, and then over the course of years they bred them.
The buffalo we see today at Badlands National Park come from those founding herds. Every fall, park biologists, veterinarians, and special volunteers hold one of the more rugged roundups in the country to monitor their bison population.
The park, although it's large, it's the largest park in the Midwest region for the National Park Service at 250,000 acres. There's only a certain amount of grazing that's available for the bison herd, and an effort to ensure that the environment isn't damaged by a herd that's too large, we have to cull that herd, cut it back into a manageable size for the grazing opportunities that we do have. So that's what this operation is about, is to return the herd to a usable population that can work well with the resources that we have.
Culling a herd of wild bison is a tricky endeavor, one that the park staff has worked to improve year after year.
We really try hard to maintain a wildness about the bison herd, so that when we do our culling operation, it's done in relative peace and quiet, with the idea of treating them, you know, ensuring that wild nature of the buffalo. And buffalo are not like like cattle. You know, a lot of people look at it that it's just like rounding cows, but it's not. They're very unpredictable. They can move very well as a herd for direction, and then again, if something happens, they can move with great determination. That can make it very, very difficult. And even in the process of working them through the complex over here, we have to take great care, because if anything would spook the animals, it could really not only hurt the animals, causing unnecessary mortality, but it could also hurt the entire operation. So that, for example, instead of just having fences, all the chutes, everything is built with large plastic panels, so that the bison can't see the people working in the corrals and doing all the work. And that way they don't get spooked by the presence of the people. It also helps us move them in different directions. And it helps protect the bison from each other, especially once they're going into pens. Because if any of the bulls get spooked, It's easy for a calf or a yearling to get stompled and injured, or you take just a bull who throws a horn and all of a sudden an animal gets gored, and then the smell of blood can really impact our ability to do the job. And we really want to have as few fatalities as possible. I think we've been exceptionally successful at that, and that's pretty remarkable. We'll move more than 600 animals through the culling operation.
The park uses the opportunity of having all the animals gathered together to do some research as well.
The stage at where we do most of our work with the bison, most of the handling, get all our data, is the final stage in the chute system is called a squeeze chute. And what that does is you bring them in from other chutes individually, put them in there, you squeeze it down to hold them, not tight. And then you can take blood samples, put ear tags in, check their teeth for their age, and all that. So it's built specifically for bison, and it works really well. We can run adults and calves through it.
Once the samples are taken, they're handed over to park veterinarian Eddie Childers for processing.
But that's the first test we do, brucellosis. I also take, from our females, I take blood and I look at the blood for a pregnancy test. We send the samples off to Texas A&M University, and we look at the pregnancy rate on all of our females. And that gives me an idea how many calves we're going to have next year, which gives me an idea of how many we need to cull that year and this year. So we try to keep a careful look and a close monitor of our population. So we do brucellosis, then we do pregnancy tests this year, and we also do some genetics tests, and we've been doing that for the last 5 years. So any new animals that come in that we haven't seen before, we'll take a tail hair sample and look at the follicles there to extract the DNA. And also we put samples on an FTA card. I don't know if I have, this is one right here. And you just put the blood right in these little circles here. And they have a machine, and these also go to Texas A&M University. And we look at the DNA, and we're just monitoring. We're trying to keep a healthy herd genetically and preserve unique genes in the herd. You know, there are unique genes to our herd that show resistance to certain diseases. So we want to keep that going in the population. So basically that's what we do as far as tests.
Because our herds are generally very pure, we want to be very careful if we bring in any animals in to supplement the herds to increase genetic variability. We don't bring in any animals that have cattle genes.
The bison are also microchipped in the chute, so exact data can be gathered over the years.
From a distance, the public can look upon it and see a herd of bison. There's no radio collars or anything, but in fact there's a tremendous database of information on those same animals.
The bison are only on about 64,000 acres of the North Unit, 100,000 acres, and we'd like to someday have bison throughout the whole park. They just belong there. The people want to see them there, and it'd just be great, I think, if we could do that, restore bison and get them roaming throughout Badlands National Park.
The animals that are culled from the herd are loaded up and shipped to new homes, mostly to Native American tribes working to reestablish herds.
We give some to the Oglala Sioux Parks and Recreation Authority down south, and we give a lot to the Intertribal Bison Cooperative, and they're kind of a clearinghouse of tribes, 55 tribes throughout the nation. And they take proposals from tribes who want to start their own bison herds, and they pick the best place to send the bison. This year, they're going to Spirit Lake North Dakota, Spirit Lake Sioux Tribe, and also to Standing Rock in North Dakota. So we gave them a good mix of males, females, yearlings, a couple bulls, so they'll be very happy.
The process of restoring these ecosystems and maintaining them, it's an ongoing adventure. I mean, we continue to learn from new science and new technologies and from past mistakes. I think the Park Service and Badlands National Park, we've done a remarkably good job with it, especially if you look at the last 20 years. Many species here, I would like to say, were hunted or through disease were eliminated almost to the point of extinction. And through a lot of programs, the park has been working at reintroducing and bringing back species and restoring that balance. The bison is definitely a success for us, you know, with their reintroduction in the early 1960s, bighorn sheep. The black-footed ferret has been something which has been ongoing here for the last 5 or 6 years, and now it's been the swift fox. And I think so far all these populations are holding very, very well, and they're doing very well.
The Park Service can help rebuild the ecosystem to what it once was. But Badlands National Park will always be an enclosed area, which is not how it was hundreds of years ago.
We want to make sure everything has enough to eat. We want to make sure everything has enough habitat and we don't overgraze. We want to make sure we have plenty of mixed grass prairie, tall and short grasses. We want to make sure that we have plenty of ferret habitat. So to keep the population in balance, since there are no large predators, we need to be the person managing the ecosystem here. You know, bison are just a small part of our wildlife population here. We have other ungulates, grass-eating animals. We have bighorn sheep, pronghorn antelope. We have mule deer, white-tailed deer. So we look at it from an ecosystem standpoint.
Visitors who want to learn more about all aspects of the park, from its paleontological history, social history, and the conservation efforts being done today, can stop by the Ben Reifel Visitor Center, located on the North Unit. Badlands National Park is an ever-changing, always evolving landscape that will always electrify and inspire all who enter its borders.
It's part of our heritage. I think every person has an intrinsic desire to be able to be in nature, to be able to observe animals. But I think we can take an opportunity to learn a lot about them and a lot about ourselves as well. So really these restoration efforts are very, very important, not only to the scientific community, but to the heritage of the American public.
The mission of the National Park Service is to preserve park resources for future generations. And I think the importance and value of that mission continues and will become even more important in the generations to come. The story out here for this portion of the country in South Dakota is valuable and needs to be protected. And by maintaining the natural ecosystem and the animal populations and the vegetation is all a reflection of an important story for the state and for the country as a whole, for our children and their children. And that's what this is all about, an effort to restore and maintain that ecosystem so that people long after us will be able to look at it and study it and enjoy it, just like our ancestors once did.
Production funding for The Badlands, Nature's Time Capsule, has been provided by Golden West Telecommunications, by the Friends of South Dakota Public Broadcasting Endowment Fund, and by
You don't get a little sun behind you. Too bad you don't get a little sun behind you.